She had grown up in a world where people stood when she entered a room. As the daughter of a respected chief, she learned early how power worked, how words could calm a crowd, and how responsibility weighed heavier than praise. From a young age, she was taught to observe more than she spoke. She watched her father handle conflicts, protect his people, and make decisions that affected thousands. Many believed she would one day follow in his footsteps, not as a ruler, but as a leader with her own kind of strength. She was known for being active and independent. She drove herself everywhere, volunteered at community programs, and helped manage charity projects connected to her father's office. She believed deeply in service. To her, privilege meant duty, not comfort. Even when people treated her differently because of her family name, she tried to remain grounded. She laughed easily, worked long hours, and rarely complained. Life, though demanding, felt meaningful. That changed on an ordinary evening that began like any other. She had stayed late at a community center, reviewing plans for a youth education project. It was raining lightly when she left, the kind of rain that blurred the road but didn't seem dangerous. She remembered thinking about calling her father when she got home, to tell him the project was finally approved. She never made that call. The accident itself was sudden, but the consequences were lasting. One moment she was focused on the road. The next, her world shifted in a way she could never undo. When she woke up in the hospital, time felt broken. Hours passed without meaning. Machines hummed softly. Voices came and went. At first, she assumed she was simply injured and needed rest. It took days before a doctor sat beside her bed and spoke words that would divide her life into before and after. She would not walk again. The sentence did not sound real. She waited for the doctor to explain further, to correct himself, to say there was hope hidden somewhere in the details. But the truth stayed the same. Her lower body no longer responded to her thoughts. She felt nothing, no matter how hard she tried to move. Her mind understood, but her body did not listen. Her father stood by her bed every day during those early weeks. He tried to stay strong, but she saw the cracks forming. The man who had faced public pressure without fear now struggled to hide his pain. He blamed himself, though the accident was no one's fault. He spoke to the best doctors, arranged consultations, and spent hours on the phone. Nothing changed the outcome. Medical bills grew quickly. Treatments, equipment, and long-term care plans piled up. While the chief had resources, he also had enemies. Political pressure did not pause for personal tragedy. Some people offered sympathy in public while quietly preparing to take advantage of the situation behind closed doors. As weeks turned into months, attention faded. Visitors came less often. Phone calls slowed. The community that once surrounded her with respect now seemed unsure how to face her. Some didn't know what to say. Others didn't want to be reminded that power and health could disappear so suddenly. Rehabilitation was exhausting. Each day demanded effort just to complete basic tasks. She learned how to move from bed to wheelchair, how to depend on others in ways she never had before. Independence, once natural, now required planning, patience, and help. She did her best to remain hopeful, but loneliness crept in quietly. Her father's health began to decline as well. Stress, long nights, and years of responsibility caught up with him. The same people who once listened carefully to his words started questioning his decisions. Eventually, under pressure disguised as concern, he was forced into early retirement. Officially, it was said to be for his well-being. In reality, it removed his influence. With his power gone, things changed quickly. Decisions about her care were slowly taken out of her hands. Distant relatives stepped forward, claiming they wanted to help. They spoke politely, used careful language, and assured her everything would be handled properly. At first, she believed them. She wanted to believe someone still cared. One day, she was told she would be moved to a quieter place, somewhere peaceful, where costs would be lower and privacy greater. It was presented as a temporary solution. She trusted them again. The property was far from town, surrounded by dry land and broken fences. The house was old and poorly maintained. What little staff was assigned to her changed often. Promises of regular care slowly turned into excuses. Supplies arrived late, or not at all. Appointments were postponed indefinitely. Each concern she raised was met with calm words and no action. Her father visited when he could, but his strength was failing. Travel became difficult. Each time he left, she feared it might be the last time she saw him. She tried not to show her worry, choosing instead to comfort him. When he passed away quietly one night, the world truly became silent. After the funeral, the visits stopped almost completely. Paperwork replaced people. Decisions were made without her consent. She was no longer the chief's daughter in the eyes of the world. She was just a responsibility that cost money. Days blended together. Mornings began with waiting. Afternoons passed in stillness. At night, the wind moved through the open land, carrying sounds of animals and distant roads. She stared out of the window often, wondering how life had narrowed so completely. She wasn't physically alone all the time, but emotionally, she might as well have been. No one asked about her dreams anymore. No one talked about her future. Conversations were short and practical, focused only on what was necessary to keep her alive. In her quiet moments, she thought about who she used to be. The confident woman who believed in change. The daughter who stood proudly beside her father. That version of herself felt like a stranger now, yet somewhere deep inside, a small part of her refused to disappear completely. She did not know it then. But this was the lowest point of her life. The moment when everything familiar had been stripped away. The moment before something unexpected would enter her story. For now, she waited, forgotten by power, dismissed by family, and left in a place where hope felt like a memory rather than a promise. After her father's passing, the silence around the remote house grew heavier. It was no longer just the absence of visitors. It was the feeling that the world had decided she no longer mattered. The days continued, but they did not move forward. Each morning arrived slowly, and each night felt longer than the last. The relatives who had promised care became distant shadows. They handled everything through messages and paperwork. When they did appear, their visits were short and uncomfortable. They spoke about expenses, schedules, and responsibilities. Never about her thoughts or feelings. Their voices were polite, but their eyes avoided hers. She sensed that to them, she was no longer a person, only a problem to manage. The staff assigned to help her changed often. Some were kind but inexperienced. Others treated their work like a burden. Simple needs were delayed. Meals arrived late or cold. Medications were sometimes forgotten, then rushed through without explanation. When she tried to speak up, she was told not to worry, that things would improve soon. But they never did. She learned to lower her expectations. Asking for too much only brought disappointment. Instead, she focused on surviving each day without trouble. She watched the light change outside her window. She counted the cracks in the walls. She listened to the sounds of the land, the wind, distant animals, the creak of the old house settling at night. Once, she had believed that her name carried meaning, that her family's history would protect her. Now she understood how quickly respect could disappear when power faded. People who once stood beside her father now crossed the street to avoid conversation. They did not want to be reminded of what could happen to anyone. Her wheelchair became both her freedom and her prison. It allowed her to move, but only within limits. The ground outside the house was uneven, making it difficult to go far. Most days, she stayed indoors, moving from room to room, memorizing the space. The house felt smaller with each passing week. Loneliness did not arrive suddenly. It built slowly, like dust settling in forgotten corners. At first, she missed conversations. Then she missed being asked questions. Eventually, she missed being seen at all. There were days when she spoke to no one for hours. When she did speak, her voice sounded strange to her own ears, as if it belonged to someone else. She tried to keep her mind active. She read old books left behind in the house. Some were outdated. others damaged by time. But she read them anyway. Reading helped her escape the present, even if only briefly. She also kept a small notebook where she wrote her thoughts. She did not know who would ever read them. But writing reminded her that she still existed. Her health began to suffer in quiet ways. Without proper therapy, her body weakened. Small pains grew into constant discomfort. She mentioned it during rare check-ins. But nothing changed. There was always an excuse: budget limits, scheduling issues, paperwork delays. Each excuse sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed neglect. At night, memories returned without warning. She remembered standing beside her father during public events, feeling proud. She remembered driving freely, choosing where to go, planning her future. These memories hurt, but she held on to them anyway. They reminded her that she had once been more than this moment. Some days, anger replaced sadness. She felt anger toward her relatives, toward the system, toward herself for trusting too easily. She replayed conversations in her mind, wondering when things had gone wrong. She questioned whether she should have fought harder earlier, spoken louder, refused to be moved. But regret offered no solution. Only exhaustion. The house itself seemed to reflect her situation. Paint peeled from the walls, doors stuck in their frames. The fence outside leaned dangerously, sections broken and left unrepaired. It felt like the place had been chosen not for comfort, but for forgetting. Far enough away that no one would notice what happened inside. There were moments when fear crept in quietly. What if something happened and no one came? What if she needed help and no one answered? She learned to keep her phone close at all times, even though reception was unreliable. Sometimes she imagined calling for help and hearing nothing but silence on the other end. Still, she did not give up entirely. Something inside her resisted disappearing. Even when her body felt weak, her mind searched for small signs of control. She organized what little space she could reach. She set personal routines. Even if no one else cared, these small acts reminded her that she was still capable of choice. One afternoon, while looking through old documents left behind in a drawer, she found copies of medical reports and care agreements. As she read them carefully, she noticed details that did not match her reality. Services that were listed but never provided. Visits recorded that had never happened. Names she did not recognize. For the first time in months, something other than sadness filled her chest. It was a quiet awareness. A realization that what was happening to her was not just unfortunate. It was wrong. The system meant to protect her had failed, and people had taken advantage of her silence. She did not know what she could do yet. Her situation felt too fragile. Her position too weak. But the thought stayed with her. She began paying closer attention. She noted dates, conversations, changes in staff. She wrote everything down in her notebook, careful and precise. Hope did not return all at once. It appeared as a small idea, fragile but persistent. The idea that her story was not finished yet. That being left behind did not mean being erased forever. Outside, the seasons changed. The land dried under the sun, then cooled again. Life continued beyond the broken fence. Sometimes, she watched the distant road from her window, imagining people passing by. Unaware of her presence, she wondered if anyone would ever stop. For now, she remained where she was physically limited, socially abandoned, and underestimated by everyone who had control over her life. But inside her, something had shifted. She was no longer only waiting. She was observing, remembering, and slowly preparing. Even if she did not yet know how, she had been left behind, yes. But she was still alive. And somewhere beyond the quiet land and broken promises, a change was moving toward her unnoticed, unannounced, and closer than she could imagine. Life at the remote house followed the same slow rhythm until one early morning when something unusual happened. She noticed movement near the broken fence while looking out her window. At first, she thought it was just an animal passing through. But then she saw a man standing there, tall and still, studying the damaged wood as if it mattered. He did not arrive in a loud vehicle or announce himself. He came on a horse, moving calmly across the dry land. His clothes were worn but clean, and his hat shaded his face. There was nothing dramatic about his presence, yet it drew her attention immediately. It had been a long time since someone new appeared without a reason tied to paperwork or duty. Later that day, the sound of hammering echoed across the land. The fence was being repaired. No one had told her anyone was coming. Curious and cautious, she rolled her wheelchair closer to the door. From there, she could see him working quietly, focused, careful with each movement. He did not rush. He did not seem bothered by the heat or the time. When he noticed her watching, he paused. He did not stare or look away quickly like others often did. He simply nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and returned to his work. No questions, no expressions of pity. That simple moment felt different from anything she had experienced in months. Over the next few days, he returned. Each time, he worked on something practical, fixing a gate, securing loose boards, clearing a path where weeds had taken over. She later learned that the land-bordered property he helped maintain. The repairs were necessary, but no one had bothered to do them for a long time. What surprised her most was not what he fixed, but how he behaved. He did not ask who she was or why she lived there. He did not offer help she hadn't asked for. He did not avoid her either. When their paths crossed, he greeted her with a brief nod or a quiet word. His presence felt steady, not intrusive. She began timing her mornings so she could sit near the window when he arrived. Watching him work became part of her routine. It gave her days a shape again. She noticed small details: the way he checked his tools before starting, the way he treated his horse with care, the way he paused to drink water and look over the land as if listening to it. One afternoon, a strong wind made it difficult for her to close the door properly. She struggled, feeling frustration rise. He noticed from a distance and walked over without hesitation. Without making a big show of it, he adjusted the door so it closed smoothly. He said only a few words, calm and direct, then stepped back, giving her space. That simple act stayed with her long after he left. Unlike others, he did not treat her as fragile or invisible. He spoke to her the way one speaks to an equal. His silence did not feel empty. It felt respectful. In his quiet way, he acknowledged her existence without reducing her to her condition. Days passed, and small changes followed. Sometimes, he left a container of fresh water near the door when the supply truck was late. Once, after noticing her difficulty reaching a shelf, he built a lower storage space without being asked. He never explained himself, or waited for thanks. He just did what needed to be done. She began to feel something she had almost forgotten: safety. Not the kind that comes from locks or rules, but the kind that comes from knowing someone nearby would notice if something went wrong. One evening, while he rested by the fence, she gathered the courage to speak more than usual. She asked him where he came from. He answered simply, without detail. When she asked why he worked alone, he shrugged and said he preferred it that way. His words were few, but they felt honest. She did not tell him her story. Not yet. Somehow, she did not feel the need to explain herself to be understood. He accepted her presence without conditions. The staff noticed the changes too. They became more attentive, perhaps aware that someone else was watching now. Deliveries arrived on time. Repairs were completed faster. The house felt less forgotten. One afternoon, he brought a folded piece of paper and placed it on the table near her. It had a phone number written on it. He said, calmly, that if she ever needed help and could not reach anyone else, she could call. Then he left, as quietly as always. She stared at the paper for a long time. It was such a small thing, yet it carried weight. No one had given her a choice like that in a long time. Slowly, she began to talk more when he was around. About the weather, about the land, about things that did not matter much but filled the silence. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was thoughtful and to the point. His presence reminded her of something important. Kindness did not need permission or recognition. It could exist quietly, without promises. She noticed changes within herself too. She sat straighter. She paid more attention to her surroundings. She felt less like she was fading. Even her writing in the notebook changed. The words became clearer, less heavy. One morning, she noticed him watching her practice simple arm exercises outside. He did not comment. But later that day, he returned with a resistance band and showed her a few safe movements she could try. He said he knew someone who had benefited from them. He did not push. He left the choice to her. That choice mattered. She realized then that hope had not arrived with grand words or dramatic rescue. It had arrived on horseback, quietly, through consistency and respect. Through someone who saw her as capable, not broken. She still lived in the same house. Her situation had not magically changed. But something inside her had shifted again. She was no longer alone in the way she had been before. As the sun set behind the land and the repaired fence stood firm, she understood that this man's presence was not an accident. It was the beginning of something new, not a rescue, but a reminder that even in silence, someone could choose to stand beside her. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that standing beside her might be enough to help her stand up for herself again. The days after his quiet help did not suddenly become easy, but they became clearer. For the first time in a long while, she felt like time was moving forward instead of circling the same empty space. The man on the horse continued to come and go, never staying too long, never explaining more than necessary. Yet his steady presence changed how she looked at her own life. She began to follow small routines again. In the mornings, she practiced the simple exercises he had shown her. They were not difficult, but they required focus and patience. At first, her arms tired quickly, and frustration returned. Some days she wanted to stop, but then she remembered how calmly he had shown her the movements, without pressure, without expectation. That memory helped her try again. Little by little, her strength improved. It was not a miracle, but it was real. She could move with more control. She could sit longer without discomfort. These small changes gave her confidence she had lost. Confidence did not shout, it whispered. But she listened. With clearer thoughts came clearer purpose. She returned to her notebook, not just to write feelings, but facts. She organized her notes carefully. Dates, names, missed services, broken promises. She compared them with the documents she had found earlier. The gaps were undeniable. Seeing the truth written down made it harder to ignore. One afternoon, when the man stopped by to check the fence, she decided to speak honestly. She told him about the missing care, the false records, and the way decisions had been taken from her. She did not speak with anger. She spoke calmly, as if explaining a problem that needed a solution. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. He did not give advice right away. Instead, he asked one simple question. Had she kept proof? She showed him her notebook. He read through it carefully, treating it with respect, as if it mattered. When he handed it back, he told her that what she had done was important. He explained that truth had power when it was organized. He also mentioned someone he knew in a nearby town who helped people understand their rights, especially those who were often ignored. He did not promise outcomes. He did not say everything would be fixed. He only offered to help her make contact, if she wanted. For the first time since her father's passing, the choice was truly hers. She agreed. The first phone call was difficult. Her voice shook. Not from fear, but from the weight of finally being heard. The person on the other end listened carefully, asked questions, and did not rush her. They asked her to send copies of her notes and documents. When the call ended, she felt exhausted but lighter. After that, things began to move. Slowly but steadily. More calls followed. More questions. Requests for clarification. Someone finally noticed the details she had been carrying alone for so long. The relatives who managed her care began to change their tone. Their messages became more frequent, more careful. They asked how she was feeling. They spoke about improvements and adjustments. She noticed the shift immediately. It confirmed what she already knew. Attention changed everything. The staff at the house also became more consistent. Schedules improved. Supplies arrived on time. Services listed on paper started appearing in real life. No one explained why the sudden change happened, but she understood. Through all of this, the man remained in the background. He did not involve himself directly. He never spoke on her behalf. He simply checked in when he passed by, asking how she was doing, listening when she spoke. She appreciated that more than she could say. He believed in her ability to fight for herself. As weeks passed, she felt her sense of self returning. She dressed with more care. She sat outside more often, enjoying the open air. She spoke with clearer confidence during calls. She was no longer asking to be saved. She was asking for fairness. There were moments of doubt. Some nights, old fears returned. What if this stopped? What if the attention faded again? But each time, she reminded herself that she had already taken the hardest step, refusing to stay silent. One afternoon, she received news that an official review would take place. It would look into her care arrangements and the actions of those responsible. She closed her eyes after the call, letting the reality sink in. This was not revenge. It was accountability. When she told the man, he smiled slightly and said she had done the hardest part herself. That night, she thought of her father. She imagined what he would say if he could see her now. She believed he would be proud not because she had influence, but because she had found her voice again. As the process continued, she began planning beyond survival. She thought about the future, not as a distant idea, but as something she could shape. She considered learning more about advocacy, about helping others who had been forgotten the way she had been. Her body still had limits, but her life no longer felt limited. The man's visits became less frequent as the fence repairs finished and the land settled into order again. She understood this without sadness. He had never been meant to stay forever. He had come when he was needed. On his last visit, he stood by the gate and spoke more than usual. He told her that strength did not always look loud. Sometimes it looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like writing things down when no one was watching. She thanked him, not with dramatic words, but with honesty. She told him that he had reminded her of who she was. He nodded, tipped his hat, and turned back toward the open land. As she watched him leave, she did not feel abandoned. She felt ready. Her life was still rebuilding. Challenges remained. But she was no longer waiting for rescue. She was moving forward, step by step, choice by choice. The woman who had once been left behind was now standing firmly in her truth, quietly, steadily, and with purpose. The review did not end quickly. It took time, patience, and many conversations. But for the first time in years, she was part of every decision. Her words were written down. Her experiences were taken seriously. People asked questions and waited for her answers. That alone felt like a victory. During the process, she was moved to a safer and better supported place. It was not perfect, but it was clean, organized, and staffed by people who showed up when they said they would. Simple things made a difference. Regular meals, scheduled therapy, clear communication. These were not favors. They were basic care, and finally, she was receiving them. The relatives who had controlled her life faded into the background. Some faced consequences for their actions. Others chose silence. She did not focus on them. She had spent too long looking backward. Now her attention was on what came next. Her health stabilized. With proper therapy, her body responded better than expected. Progress came slowly, but it came. She learned new ways to manage daily tasks. Each skill gained added to her independence. Independence no longer meant doing everything alone. It meant having control over choices. She also continued writing. Her notebook became a record of survival and growth. She wrote about small wins, days without pain, moments of laughter, conversations that mattered. Writing helped her understand that her life had not ended when her body changed. It had simply taken a different path. Word of her experience reached others through quiet channels. People began reaching out, asking how she had managed to speak up, how she had kept going. At first, she was unsure what to say. She was not an expert. She was just someone who had refused to disappear. But she realized that was enough. She started sharing her story in simple ways through letters, calls, and small meetings. She spoke honestly, without drama. She talked about being overlooked, about writing things down, about asking for help even when it felt uncomfortable. People listened because her story was real. Over time, she became involved with groups that supported individuals facing similar challenges. She did not lead with authority. She led with understanding. She knew what it felt like to be unheard, and that made her careful with her words and patient with others. Her father's memory stayed close to her. She honored him not by holding on to his position, but by continuing his values: service, responsibility, quiet strength. She believed that if he were still alive, he would recognize the woman she had become. Sometimes, she thought about the man who had arrived on horseback during her darkest days. She did not know where he was now. They never stayed in touch. But his influence remained present in her choices. He had not saved her. He had reminded her that she could save herself. Years passed. Her life settled into a rhythm that felt right. She lived with support, but also with dignity. She planned her days. She laughed more easily. She allowed herself to imagine happiness again. Not as something grand, but as peace. She never walked again. That truth remained. But it no longer defined her limits. Her voice traveled farther than her feet ever had. Through advocacy, she helped improve care standards and awareness in quiet but meaningful ways. People who met her often noticed her calm confidence. They did not see someone broken. They saw someone steady. Someone who had faced loss and chosen purpose. On quiet evenings, she still watched the land from a window, though the view had changed. Roads, trees, and passing people reminded her how far she had come. She no longer waited for rescue. She waited for tomorrow, with interest instead of fear. Her story did not end with revenge or victory over others. It ended with balance, with accountability where needed, and forgiveness where possible. Most of all, it ended with self-respect. She understood now that being left behind did not mean being forgotten forever. Sometimes, it meant being forced to find strength in unexpected places. Her life became proof that even when everything familiar is taken away, something important can still grow. Quietly, slowly, truthfully. And though the world never knew all the details of her journey, those she helped carried her lessons forward. That was enough. She had survived. She had spoken. And she had chosen to live fully on her own terms.